Hi, we're back for part 3 of Sunkissed Tulips, and we're going to stop working on the flowers for a little while and start filling in the background and the leaves. So I'm using a large round brush and some plantation pine, and I'm just filling in the negative space between the leaves with this color. Doesn't have to be a solid coverage. It's better to have some variegation to give it some texture, to look like ground cover behind the flowers and leaves. So just scrub in all these areas with the plantation pine. Now I'm putting out some blueberry and winter blue, and I'm going to start working on the leaves. A lot of these leaves have a very blue cast to them, so the blueberry is a nice complement to the purples and pinks and the tulips. So I'm just going to, again, stroke this in over some of the leaves. I'm going to add some of the plantation pine to it and some of the winter blue to create some lighter values for highlights. And you're going to vary these leaves. You don't want them all the same value or the same color. So some we're going to use more green, more of the plantation pine to make them green. Some of them we're going to make lighter by adding more of the winter blue, and some we're going to keep a little darker with the blueberry and some of the plantation pine mixed in with that. So here you can see I'm just picking up a little bit of the winter blue and running it along this edge to create a highlight on along the side of the leaf. I'm just stroking these leaves in, following the growth of the leaf. Moving to the next leaf, we're going to pick up the blueberry and some of the plantation pine. This will make it a darker greener color. And again, we're just going to stroke this in real quickly, following the leaf from the base up to the tip. You can add a little bit of red, to bring some of our tulip colors in, and it builds in an accent color. Plus the red being a complement to the green will make the color a darker value. So I'm just going to quickly move ahead on these. You can take your time painting them, but I don't think you need to see me paint each and every leaf. So we'll just go through a progression of these quickly. This one is a little greener, lighter, so it has more of the winter blue and the plantation pine. I'm trying to make the leaves that are further in the background darker, and try to make some of the ones that are closer to the front lighter and a little warmer. So this one has more of the not evergreen, I keep wanting to say evergreen, but I mean plantation pine. It's a nice warm yellow green. So as you come around the tulips, just work in close as you can get without covering your tulip. We're going to go back in the next step and do some final refining on the edges of the tulips. As you're working like this leaf that goes behind the stem, kind of pay attention to the values. You want that leaf a little darker than the stem value so that they're separated. So the stem will be a little bit lighter and the leaf behind it will be just a little darker. To add a little more accent colors to the leaves, you can pick up a little bit of the brilliant purple in your mix and just give just a touch of lavender cast to some of these leaves. Again, we want to pick up a few of the tulip colors so that they're repeated in the leaves. Now that the leaves are mostly based in, I'm going to go back and add a few little highlights. So I've mixed up a light value and I'm going to streak this in on some of the leaves to add some more texture. This is a little lighter value than what the leaf was based in. So it's like sort of almost dry brushed highlighting over top of the leaf. There's a leaf here that kind of crosses a couple behind. It goes behind the stem and across these two leaves, and it's so much the value of the leaves that it's laying across. We need to change that a little bit. So I'm going to add a little darker edge on here so that it separates it from those leaves behind it. Use a light value on some of these light leaves, and I used white, and you can dirty it up with a little bit of the blue-green mix, and I'm just stroking, making streaks down the leaf to add texture. Iris leaves have a lot of like ridges down them, so this kind of adds that effect. I'm going to do some darker veining in the leaves with some of the purple, and this will add some darker veins. We can do purple or purple plus some of the blueberry. We just want something darker than the leaf itself, so I've also added a little bit of the plantation pine. This is all just to give some of that veining texture to the leaves. So let's move back to the tulips again, and I've put out some fresh Tuscan red, and I'm going to just work some of this over the tulips again, another glaze of this brighter red color. This will help clean up the edges where we put the leaves in and make the tulips a little more vibrant. This is just a glaze of color, so the paint is, I picked it up on a wet brush, so the paint's very thin and transparent. I'm going to continue with this red and work some down the center of the tulip stems. This red being a complement of the green, when you add it over those green stems, will just darken them down. We want them to look sort of like they're backlit, so that the sides are lighter and the center's darker, so it's like light shining from behind. And this is just a wash of color, so it's very transparent. Mixed up a little light green value, and I realized I had forgotten to put a couple leaves in here. So I'm going to fill those two in. So I'm using the winter blue and the plantation pine to make a light green value. I pick up some coral color and add a wash of this back in some areas of the tulips. As I said, you know, the tulips is just a lot of layers going back and forth, building up the values and tints in them. So I like the little touches of coral because it's a warm color that kind of looks like sunshine. If you get too much, just, you know, I had probably a little too much water in my brush, so I just blotted it off with a paper towel. I'll add a little bit of this coral color into the stems to warm them up. And I'm going to dab some of this into the upper part of the canvas, into the negative space between the leaves. Again, this is just a matter of repeating colors. So we have a little bit of that coral in the stems and flowers, and so we're going to put a little bit up here in the background. Just work a little bit, just a wash of it here and there through some of the other negative space also. This is just a very sheer layer, touching it on the top of some of these tulip petals where the sunlight might hit. So we're going to go back now and reinforce our sharp white highlights on the edges of the petals using a liner brush and cool white. I put out a little bit of burnt umber, and with the burnt umber and a little bit of blueberry mixed together, this makes kind of a blackish color, but it's still more organic than black paint out of the bottle. I'm going to go and shade, add little, kind of like little twig shapes in the negative space at the bottom of the canvas. So I'm just pulling little short strokes in different directions. I decided I want something a little darker, so now I've put out a touch of black just to mix into that, just to darken up a little bit more, especially in some of these darker areas of the background. Again, it's all about values. You want to be able to add strokes that are contrast with what your underpainting is a little. So you can see this shows up a little bit more, just darkens that mix just to the next level. Still not as harsh as a straight black would be, but it just, like I said, when we added it to the mix of the burnt umber and the blueberry, it just took it just a little bit darker. You can sort of outline these little negative space areas, and it makes the whole thing a little crisper. Cleans up the edges of your leaves. I think that the darkness of these little negative space areas adds a little more depth to the whole picture. So we filled in these dark spaces up to the tulips. And now I want to add a little bit of contrasting highlight to these little twiggy spaces by mixing a dirty green color. So we use some coral and some plantation pine. And we're just going to overstroke these little areas, again with the little short random strokes. So we want this to look sort of like little dead twigs that have fallen on the ground and become sort of a ground cover. Now I flipped the canvas upside down and we're going to use that dark mix of the burnt umber and blue and a touch of black, and I want to keep the area above the tulips a little lighter, but I do want to shade it. So I'm going to add that dark value to shade along the leaves and above the tulips. We just want to lay some of that dark color down and soften it as you work up towards the top of the canvas. I just find this easier to do upside down, so you can use I'm using a little angle brush here that's just dry, just to soften out that top edge and walk that color out. So there you can see we've got the negative space below the tulips darkened and the little twiggy texture added. And above the tulips we've shaded to the bottom, towards the bottom of the canvas in each of those little negative spaces.